am Gail Carr-Williams, Board Chair for the Nashville Metropolitan Transit Authority. Thanks again for joining this special WebEx. We certainly have come far from in-person to telephone calls to WebEx, so there is growth in all things, right? So today is Thursday, December 17th, 2020, and it is the start of our meeting at 2:30. So, as we know, due to continued COVID-19 pandemic and the continued declaration of a state of emergency by Governor Bill Lee, we're holding this meeting without objection via video conference in order to conduct essential MTA business while protecting the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans. This meeting will be held in accordance with Governor Lee's Executive Order number 60. So before we get started, I will turn this over to Monica for a few housekeeping matters so we can keep things moving smoothly and allow full participation by this board and others. So, Monica.
Hello, everyone. I ask that everyone please mute your phones and or computers until you're acknowledged by Chair Carr-Williams to speak. Also, please remember to use the raise your hand feature when you're wanting to leave a comment on a particular board item. And also, please remember to lower your hand when you're done speaking. Lastly, when it's time to vote, all board members will be asked to unmute. And if you're in favor of the board action item, we ask that you vote by saying aye. If you oppose an action item, we're asking that you state your name for the record. That concludes our housekeeping rules.
Thank you, Monica. I appreciate you getting this together for us every month as well. I'm going to call this meeting officially to order, with the first order of business being roll call. And also, so you know, this meeting is being recorded. So if you could please speak up and note your presence when I call your name by stating present and restating your name for me, please. Janet Miller.
Janet Miller, present.
Mary Griffin.
Mary Griffin, present.
Hannah Paramore Breen. I know she's trying to log on, so we'll come back to Hannah. Is Walter on the line?
No, he is not.
Okay, Walter is not, and Gail Carr-Williams present. So we do, even with Janet, Mary, and myself, we do have a quorum. Additional attendees, if you could please note your presence when I call your name. Board Secretary and General Counsel Margaret Bim.
She is trying to connect as well.
Okay. CEO Steve Bland.
Steve Bland, present.
CAO Rita Roberts Turner.
Rita Roberts Turner, present.
CFO Ed Oliphant.
Ed Oliphant, present.
COO Bill Miller.
Bill Miller, present.
CDO Trey Walker. I love all these C's, right?
Trey Walker, present.
You know what the C's stand for, right? It's cool. Like y'all are cool, right? Yes, that's why all of y'all got C's, because all of y'all are cool, right? So, Director Service Quality, Dan Friedberg.
Dan Friedberg, present.
Dan, you cool too. Transit Stop Manager, Denise Nichols.
Denise Nicolosi, present.
I'm sorry, Denise, I pronounced that wrong. Your last name wrong. I apologize.
That's okay, Gail. It gets butchered quite often.
I always feel badly when I do that, but okay. Nicolosi, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Very good.
I apologize. Community Outreach and Engagement Specialist, Miriam Leibowitz.
Miriam Leibowitz, present.
And Monica House, Executive Assistant and Board Liaison.
I am present.
Thank you. So the first action item on our agenda, and before I move forward, has Hannah signed on yet? And you see if she has, I don't see that she has.
I don't see that she has on the screen. Margaret Bim, Secretary Margaret Bim is on the line. I'll keep reaching out for Hannah.
And welcome, Margaret. We'll let the record reflect that Margaret is on the call. So first on our agenda is the approval of the minutes of the November 19th, 2020 board minutes. If I could have a motion for approval?
Mary Griffin, move to approve.
Thank you, Mary. Is there a second?
Janet Miller, second.
So there is a motion and a second. So all in favor? Janet Miller,
Janet Miller, aye.
Mary Griffin,
Mary Griffin, aye.
Hannah's here.
Hannah's here. Gail Carr Williams is an aye. Janet, Hannah, we had on the table the motion for approval of the November 19th MTA board meetings.
Yeah.
It was a motion and a second, and we were in the middle of a vote. I don't know if you heard that or not.
I did. I heard it.
So is your vote, what is your vote on that motion?
Vote is to approve. I voted aye.
So the minutes are approved. Okay, and next on our agenda, we have public comments. I have notation that I have public comment requests from 2 people. First one being Darius Knight. Is Mr. Knight available?
I'm available.
Hello, Mr. Knight.
How you doing?
Great, thank you. So you're up, and remember you have 3 minutes.
Alrighty. Well, first off, I'd like to start by saying happy holidays to everybody. I hope everybody is well. I want to bring up some issues that I reached out to staff about and to customer service a few days ago. We have a few customers getting on the bus with their mask, and the operators are doing a really tremendous job. They're really doing everything they possibly can, asking passengers to wear their mask. Problem we have is customers are getting on with their mask, and then they're pulling their mask down while they take a seat on the bus. And some of the customers seem to be coughing and sneezing directly out. And I'm just really concerned about this situation because I overheard 2 drivers speaking about another driver getting ill. I'm not going to go into that section, but it kind of concerns me when we have customers that are not being respectful and mindful of the operator. Without the operator, the buses are not going to be rolling. So I would appreciate it if staff could really work hard with operations to ask all operators that when they have customers who pull their mask down, that they actually ask them to put their mask back on, or even ask them to get off the bus if they do not want to comply. Also, I want to bring up some issues with a few buses looking non-clean. I was on one a few days ago that was not clean, and I actually took a Lysol wipe and I cleaned it myself. And I sent a picture to Miss Monica Howes when I sent in my public comments. It's kind of disturbing. So I don't know if she still has that available, but I'd be more than gracious if she would actually show that to you all. I just want to also say that I want to acknowledge Mr. Bland, and I want to acknowledge our council staff. I originally didn't send this in, but I saw that council did approve that transit plan that the mayor worked hard on, as well as WeGo, for the Better Bus. So I do look forward to seeing what the outcome will be of Better Bus. I also would like to commend staff on the quick ticket, the pilot program, the testing program at this point. I think that's really going to be a good set for us going forward. Seems more convenient to me, perfectly honestly, at this point with that card. I just want to say to you all, I noticed something in the information that was posted online for this meeting today. I just want to bring this quickly to your attention that it says that there's going to be an order placed for 60-foot buses under Virginia's contract, and it shows for an order of 5 buses to replace the NABI 60-foot buses, bus 180 through 185. I just want to kind of make sure that staff is aware that you all are buying 5 when the original order in 2009 was for 6. And that following year in 2010, it was for 14 of those same type of buses, which completed the order initially at 20. So I just wanted to be mindful to make sure that you guys knew that by doing this, you're going to be short by one bus, unless you're planning to actually add in another bus in the following year, if all the funding is available to actually do that for the replacement of the 60-foot buses, because that is going to be detrimental. That staff looks at these 60-foot buses because you have quite a few of those nabbies that are a problem, and there are quite a few new flyers that are becoming a problem. And that's going to conclude all of my comments today, and I just hope that everybody continues to be safe and have a great holiday. Thank you all.
Our next public comment is coming from John Bull. Mr. Bull, are you on the line?
Bill, I see your mouth moving, but it looks like you're muted.
I did mute myself. I saw it.
Here we go.
Oh, so all that stuff I said to Mr. Knight, you didn't hear, right?
We did not.
Oh, Mr. Knight, I thanked you so much for your comments, and also thank you for always being here and supporting us in so many ways, and wish you a happy, safe, and healthy holiday to you and your family. I apologize. I didn't realize I was muted all that time.
I greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. And if Mr. Bull is not on the line, we'll do what we usually do with this. Is he on?
I'm on now. Hello?
Oh, hi, Mr. Bull. You're on.
Yes, it's a couple of, y'all know me. I'm a frequent rider. I've been sheltering in place, but once a week I do my essential trips. Routes 52, 23, and 7 are well populated. A lot of folks on them. Everybody was social distancing, and everybody was wearing their masks. Seemed clean and very precise. They're right on time. The council meeting Tuesday night was seismic, is the term I would use. It's to thoroughly butcher one of Winston Churchill's quotes. It's not the beginning of the end, but most certainly is the beginning. It certainly is the end of the beginning. It's a really good start. Good day at the office there. A lot of work went into it. Quick ticket. Last couple of weeks that I've used it, it's just slicker than greased oil. I mean, it just worked great. It's running well. It's running well. That's all I've got to say, and thank you. Y'all take care.
Thank you, Mr. Bull. I appreciate all your support and all your encouragement to all of us, and wish you well and wish you a happy, healthy, and safe holiday season to you and your family. Take care of yourself, okay? And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Monica, are there any other public comments?
No, not at this time.
Okay, if there are none, then that will close the public comment section of our agenda, and we will move into the New Initiatives and Community Engagement Committee with Ms. Miller. It's all yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, lady. It's good to see you, and good to see everybody. So we've got 3 issues that are on the agenda today for discussion. 2 of them are kind of intertwined, so it'll be interesting to see how this discussion goes. And they're all really urgent issues for us to be taking up today. The first is that we're going to talk about the operating budget, and we're getting kind of a head start on discussing the budget, which I think is really smart in this pivotal year ahead. And then Felix is going to talk to us about the spring 2021 service updates. And then we'll round up with the homelessness program overview. So with that, I'm going to head it over to Mr. Oliphant to start our discussion on the 2021 operating budget.
Madam Chair, this is Steve, the CEO. I'll just do a quick introduction, then I'll head it over to Ed, kind of dovetailing on your remarks. It is that time of year again. So if you could advance to the next slide, we'll start with our overview. Ed's going to cover some of our ongoing trends and what our prospects are looking like for the FY 21-22 budget. This covers a lot of the background material that you received in the board packet that begins on page 8. I'm going to then kind of take over. You all will recall that the only reason we were able to balance this year's budget was because of the Federal CARES Act. So we'll give you an update on the status of the CARES Act and kind of where we stand on discussions that are going on in DC about a potential additional aid package. And then talk about some of the COVID-19 pandemic issues, short and longer term financially, that will kind of dovetail into what Felix talks about on the service side. And Janet alluded to the fact that these two items are kind of interrelated as to how we plan both short and long term. So we'll be very anxious to get some board discussion, questions, and any feedback that you have as we kind of set direction going into next fiscal year and beyond. Next slide. This is where Ed takes over.
This is where I get to take over. I thought we'd start with looking at where we are in the current year in terms of where we stand financially so far in fiscal year 21. Obviously, the biggest impact is related to COVID. You can see our ridership. Well, our ridership is down, and our operating revenues are down anywhere from 48 to 55%. The most significant parts of that operating revenue obviously relate to passenger fares, with ridership being down, but contract income is also down. That's related to the RTA services that we provide for them and to the Rutherford County. They are operating at reduced service levels right now, so we aren't seeing as much contract income. And then the other large area is the facility rentals. Really to fulfill one of the reasons for us receiving the CARES Act, one of those requests from the government was that we help our lessees stay fully employed. So right now we have some rent abatement agreements with Premier, who operates our garage, and Dunkin' Donuts. So those are the reasons for that. Currently in this year, we're operating at our services are down about 25% due to suspended services. However, we're not really going to see much relief in terms of our labor and staff due to the fact that we're having to cover COVID-related absences. We're still doing our enhanced cleaning services, which requires more staff. And in spite of being in reduced service levels, we have helper buses, out there at strategic locations to help with social distancing when that becomes a problem for some of our buses. So labor is pretty much going to stay exactly where we budgeted it. We're also seeing our purchase transportation and access on demand down about $500,000 or $600,000. Again, due to the reduced ridership, we're able to service most of those prescription trips on WeGo Access. Now that our in-house services productivity is down again due to social distancing and reduced trip groupings. But one bright spot is that we are seeing increased on-time performance for access. One other major trend that we're seeing right now is in our health insurance costs. As you know, we're self-insured for our health insurance, and we are seeing a larger number of high-value claims for whatever reason. Last year, we only had about 20 altogether as far as high value. We have already, through October, have seen 19. You might think that they're COVID-related. They're really not. We've only incurred about $250,000 of COVID-related health claims. Our consultants are seeing it across their other clients, and they're basically saying that people are just paying more attention to their health, probably because of the pandemic. But we will continue to monitor that, but that is one of the trends we're seeing. Now, for 22's budget, this will roll into 22 as far as higher health costs. We're seeing better fuel costs, but we still feel that a 2 to 3% increase over our fiscal year 21 is pretty reasonable. Now, that would be prior to any service enhancements we do based on the mayor's transportation plan. As far as this year, the last thing I'll talk about, the positions that we have as far as position management, we're in a really good spot. We're at about 98.5% of our authorized positions. We've constantly struggled with keeping operators on board, and we are coming really close to having full operators as far as the authorized positions that we need to run service. So that's a good thing. If you go to the next slide, please. This is a graphical presentation of where we see us moving on our baseline budget. You can see the first column is our current budget, the $90 million. The next column is where we think we will end up for this fiscal year. Obviously, it's going to be down. We believe that we will be down for actuals, again, due to the reduced service levels. But then if you look over at fiscal year 22, you see we have a 3% increase over the $90 million from the current year at about $92.5 million. We do really feel comfortable that the baseline budget will not see more than this 2 to 3% inflationary increase. If you go to the next slide. The items that we are dealing with in there, I've already mentioned about the health costs, but overall, we still think the 2 to 3% range that'll put us to that $92.5 million you just saw will be reachable. I do want to emphasize, though, that this budget anticipates that Metro will fully restore our Metro subsidy, and at this point, up to $51.6 million. That's about 3% above where we were with our ask for fiscal year 21. I do want to say we are not going to be in a position to absorb a decrease in Metro's operating subsidy like we did for this year by using the CARES Act. As you can see in that next section, as far as the CARES Act, after looking at everything we've obligated, we think that the unobligated piece of the CARES Act will be about $9.8 million. Steve's going to be addressing more of that in a couple of slides. But what we would anticipate for that $9.8 million is that it obviously be available for operating budget relief should Metro not be able to fully restore us, or better yet, to advance the mayor's transportation plan or transportation plan capital projects if they do fully restore us. As for additional relief, like the CARES Act, Steve's going to be addressing that again in a few minutes on a future slide. The timing that we are assuming in this fiscal year 22 budget and actually going forward is that it's going to be a really slow recovery of our operating income and riders returning to the bus. It's really going to be dependent on how Nashville recovers, how many people are going to actually return to their offices downtown, or kids going back to school. In spite of the vaccine being deployed, we still do feel like it's going to be a slow recovery, and I've got a slide in just a second that'll show you what that looks like. The last thing on the fiscal year 22 is we are proposing, just like we've done in the past, we've done a Tier 1 for baseline budgets and then a Tier 2 for enhanced services. We're doing the same thing again here, and I'll show you a slide in a minute that we anticipate asking for $3.2 million in Tier 2 requests for enhanced service. Now, again, this will be for a partial year funding because, again, we only changed services in October and April, so we would propose that for October, and it would be a partial year. But 3.2 is the number. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. This slide just shows you how we anticipate using the CARES Act over the next few years, as I was saying, as we recover our operating revenues. You can see in fiscal year 20, we used about 1.9. Part of that was related to the tornado as well that hit on the 1st of March. We saw some of our services being suspended for areas that were impacted by the tornado, but we also saw the reduced ridership from COVID starting to happen before the end of the month as well. So we ended up short in fare revenues, and the 1.9 was covering that. You see the lion's share in fiscal year 21, the year we're in now, that we anticipate needing for lost operating revenues at $6.7 million. And then you see we're showing a gradual recovery of revenues. And then in 22, we anticipate needing about 5.3 in CARES Act, and then even better recovery in fiscal year 23 down to 3.1. We believe that by the end of fiscal year 23, we will probably be back to whatever our new normal ridership levels will be. And I want to show you on the next slide, if you'll go to that, please. This slide is showing you how the Metro subsidy has been trending over the last few years. You can see from fiscal year 14 up to 18, we were seeing some pretty good increases. And then from 18 to 20, for those 3 years, we stayed flat. In the fiscal year 21 year that we're in, we wanted to show you what the CARES Act looked like in terms of the Metro subsidy being dropped down to the $27.3 million that they gave us this year, with a little bit of an inflationary increase. And then fiscal year 22, you can see the red portion being the baseline, and there's a little bit of an increase there up to that 51.6 that we talked about. And then the blue piece is showing you what the 3.2 million would look like for a total ask from Metro for this year of $54.8 million. So I hope that gives you an idea of where we are and how fiscal year 22 is looking, and I'll pass it on to Steve now to go to the next slide to talk about the CARES Act.
Thanks, Ed. I wasn't sure if I don't see any hands in the queue, if anyone had any questions on Ed's material to this point. I'll give a quick overview and a quick reminder. Back in the spring, after the pandemic was really starting to take hold, Congress passed and President Trump signed the $2 trillion CARES Act. With respect to, it did a whole bunch of things, but with respect to public transportation, it pumped $25 billion into the formula programs that typically fund us. And frankly, Nashville as a region and MTA as an entity did extremely well under the CARES Act relative to many other cities. This particular chart shows you what we were projecting in terms of use of CARES Act back in the spring. And now based on what Ed's looking at and what a lot of our project managers are doing on the capital side, we're projecting in that far right column where we think we are as of today. And this is how we get to that projection of about $9.8 million in unobligated CARES Act money at the end of the fiscal year. The significant changes here, we're projecting that our operating losses through fiscal year 2023 will be about $3 million higher than originally projected. Frankly, the projections we made on passenger revenue losses were actually pretty close to what we're seeing. Where we are seeing higher levels of loss are in the contracted services. Frankly, we weren't counting on RTA cutting as much contract service that we operate in the Rutherford County corridor as they have. I guess that's kind of self-inflicted since we also manage the RTA, as well as what we're seeing in terms of parking revenue losses, lease income losses. And last month, Jason Mincer spent a fair amount of time going over the advertising program with you, and out-of-home advertising is definitely taking a hit. $22.8 million reflects the help that we were able to offer to Metro Nashville government because their budget was extremely tight. So we used that CARES Act money in the amount of about just under $23 million to support Metro. Originally, we had concern that Metro was not going to be able to fulfill prior appropriations under its capital spending plan for 3 ongoing projects. We originally programmed CARES Act money to fill that gap. Fortunately, Metro has been able to sustain that obligation, and so that freed up those funds. And then a few of the projects that we're working on, things like the operator barriers, supplemental cleaning equipment, some of the upgrades we're making at Central to fulfill the federal rules in terms of being more pandemic resilient. We are projecting those projects to come in a little bit below what our original projections are, and that kind of all leads us to about a $9.8 million balance. Next slide. So you've heard, I'm sure, pretty much every morning and every evening, if you watch the network news, you hear some discussion about what Congress might do or might not do in terms of additional relief. There have really been 2 initiatives of interest. The House passed a month or 2 ago the HEROES Act, $2.2 trillion overall package that would have included $32 billion of additional support for public transportation, which has been the industry position of what the need is nationwide. Frankly, that faced and faces significant opposition on the Senate side. More recently, even in the last day or so, you've heard talk about a more bipartisan approach to relief, a little bit more modest package of $908 billion overall, which would include things like additional funding into the payroll protection program, extension of unemployment benefits, et cetera, and would also provide $15 billion into the public transit formula programs. But the thing I'd like to emphasize, and we may know as early as this weekend whether that will pass before Congress adjourns for the year. But whatever happens, it is very unlikely that whatever happens will be anywhere near as generous to the Nashville region as the CARES Act was, for reasons I'll talk about in a second. Next slide. This kind of gives you an idea of really how generous the CARES Act was to Nashville. This kind of gives you an idea of how much money came to the Nashville region relative to some of our other peer cities. We actually received twice as much money as Memphis did. And system transit agencies that are operate significantly more service than we do, Charlotte, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and Kansas City as an example, also saw significantly less revenue. This really kind of comes about because of 2 anomalies in the funding formulas. What Congress did in the act, they wanted to pump money into the economy as quickly as possible. So they appropriated $25 billion to the Federal Transit Administration and directed them to just distribute them through the normal formula process. There are two anomalies in the formula that make it more generous to the Nashville region. One is on the RTA side, where one of our funding programs is specific to rail systems. And that program alone, through the CARES Act, generated about $7.5 million to the RTA. And the other is the fact that we are actually classified, they break down the funding into city size categories of under 50,000 population, size categories of so we are a very large city in the 200,000 to a million category. So we split up a bigger chunk of that money competing against the New Yorks, the Chicagos, the Los Angeleses. The current funding that's being discussed would also be, the caveat is that if it's distributed by formula, 85% of their fiscal year 2018 total operating budget. So no matter what the formula generates for Nashville, when it's combined with the CARES Act, so because of the CARES Act money we had available, we would really only be eligible in this first tranche for about $8.2 million in additional. I don't want to make light of that. That would certainly be extraordinarily helpful one way or the other. But even if the formula dictated that Nashville should get $40 million, let's say, we would be capped at about 8.2 until every single transit agency in the United States came up to that 75%. So that's why if you read that there was a bill passed, it would be worth a cheer, but not necessarily as big a cheer as the CARES Act. Next slide, please. So one of the things, and I think Ed and I would entertain any questions you have on the financial piece, but we really need to look at next year and planning for service, both short and long term, with respect to both the pandemic and what we're seeing in terms of short and longer term ridership trends. And that's what Felix is going to be spending considerable time on. But we also have to look at potential Metro funding scenarios. You know, potentially a scenario where Metro's finances are in sound enough shape that they are able to fully meet our operating budget request, which means not only are we able to hold the line on service, but also begin implementing portions of the Better Bus program, and potentially even using some or all of those unobligated CARES Act money to start advancing capital projects like stop and shelter improvements, pedestrian safety enhancements around bus stops, and many of the great things that are in that plan. A second scenario might be we come pretty close. You know, we can hold the line, but we're not able to really add a whole lot. And part of the discussion for Felix's presentation is, should we be reordering? Should we, based on our current demand, move service resources that we currently have out there from services that are either underperforming or we've temporarily suspended into the services we know we need to add under Better Bus, both for long-term success and to maintain some of our social distancing as folks start to come back into the economy. We'll have some decision points coming up, obviously, as we get more information with respect to federal aid, possibly by the end of this week, as we go through the Metro budget process, which will likely kick off sometime in January. We'll get more data on that, and we'll continue to update the board and have significant additional discussion on what we're looking like for fiscal year 21-22. Next slide. I think with that, Madam Chair, that concludes this part of that report.
Great. Thank you. Boy, that's a lot. That's a lot to digest here. Would really like to hear from the board here on just kind of your impression of it. But I really would like to hear from each of you about the three scenarios and what is your position or approach to those three scenarios that Steve just laid out. Who wants to start? I'm going to start calling on people. Gail, do you want to chime in?
Okay.
Were we going to take Felix and add his in before we do this discussion, or it doesn't matter to me whichever
What makes
way
the most sense, Steve? Should we go ahead and go through Felix's?
I think if folks have any questions, Felix's material might add a bit more context, where you see a bit more of what those trade-offs could look like. But Madam Chair, we defer to board preference.
So I would just make one comment, and I think probably hearing from Felix first is really important. My overarching comment, and I've shared this with Steve this week, is if you all remember, 2 years ago, we had service cuts that were incredibly painful. And so there is, in my view, no fat on this bone for us to offer up that wouldn't hurt the system. That's my number one comment. And number two is planning on current demand is not the way to go here, because by this summer, which is when this budget is going to go to an effect, we anticipate we will be on the other side of this pandemic. Many offices are saying to their people, come back, sending them back in June at the latest. So I think that we need to, my opinion is, hold as firm as possible on the full restoration plus the modest ask for the addition. And the fact that the Metro Council just approved the mayor's transportation plan, to me, shows that putting some amount of money behind that plan is the right thing, and this will be the right time. So anyway, that's my global comment. Does anybody else want to chime in before we dig into the service update pieces?
No, I would agree with you 1,001%, Janet. And I think as we listen to Felix's report, it's really important that that stays in the front of our mind so we can fully understand everything that we're talking about. But I do think that it is critically important that we are fully funded to the extent that we need to be, not just where we were, but beyond that. And so I agree with you 100%.
Okay, well, with that, why don't we go ahead and we'll hear from Felix, and then we'll have a robust discussion on the back end.
Yes.
Mr. Felix, take it away.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Committee Chair Miller and members of the board. If we can advance to the next slide, please. So you heard from Steve and Ed about the budget situation, and with this item, we just want to highlight what the impacts on the ridership and the service has been approaching to the spring changes in 2021. And as you are familiar, we do system changes typically twice a year in the spring and the fall. And the degree of those changes varies depending on the context, the situation, things like ridership, trends, budget. So it gives us an opportunity to adapt and react to what we're seeing. I think it's everybody can agree that the conditions and the circumstances in 2020 have been very different to what we are used to, and our system has seen those impacts. So there's three main underlying challenges or issues that I'd like to go over real quick with you. First one being the pandemic, the COVID-19. The pandemic has required us to implement short-term changes to be able to, temporary emergency changes to be able to react. Those includes cancellation of some routes, operating a modified schedule, Saturday plus or enhanced, and adding some extra trips in some routes that are seeing overcrowding to be able to maintain social distancing. There's also what we call the medium term. Those are ridership impacts of the pandemic, and it's hard right now to know exactly, unless we have a crystal ball, what's going to happen. We're not sure when some of those markets are going to return, how fast or to what level. So it'll be a lot of assumptions, to be honest, at this point. So if you will, think about commuters, think about school ridership, think about people working jobs in the hospitality and service industry that have been seeing a slowdown in the economy. So it's hard to predict exactly when those riders are going to be back. So how do we address some of those gaps that we're seeing in the ridership, and we reallocate resources to be able to respond better to the trends that we're seeing. And then the financial constraints, and I won't really get into that. You heard from Stephen and Ed a lot more on that. But the Metro budget shortfalls play a big part on that. I will also add here that, you know, the way in which we respond to this is going to be a critical point on how we are going to make the system better and how we can respond better to the needs that we're seeing and providing a better service that to meet those needs. One important point here also, during the pandemic, the FTA has been good at relaxing the regulations as long as you're operating emergency and temporary services or changes, but there is a time limit to that, and that's a 12-month limit. And the spring of 2021 is going to be that 12-month limit. So at that point, we're going to be required to be conducting equity analyses, doing public outreach. So we need to start thinking about those temporary changes and how we address those to make them more permanent and make sure that we are planning ahead for that. Next slide, please. At the beginning of the pandemic, we made significant adjustments to reduce, on the safety side, to reduce operator exposure, enhance cleaning, and also to match the resources that we have with the amount of service that was being, or the demand of the service. We all know that the ridership has been down, on average, is down system-wide 50% or so. And, you know, some routes have seen more of a decline in ridership than others. And what we're seeing is that in some of those that are still being used or more heavily used than others, we're seeing some problems arising with overcrowding. If you look to the far right of this chart, these are routes that were suspended early on because the decline on these routes was more sharp compared to some of the other routes. So one common denominator in these is that our limited commuter-oriented service routes with an emphasis on peak hour service. And we know that it may take some time for those to come back. We don't know exactly when. And many of those riders are riders that have additional options, including working from home. So in terms of who is riding, well, these are people that have no other options. So we have a lot of people that are working critical jobs, and many of them do not have the option to work from home. Next slide, please. So the decline varies by route, but also by time of the day. One of the things that is evident with this is that there's a decline on the peak period ridership. And this reflects those jobs, traditional 9 to 5 hours, that are using the service. So this graph definitely shows the difference, a different distribution throughout the day outside of those traditional peak hour rides. And again, who are these people? These are the riders that are trying to access different kind of jobs and different services and probably have no other options, so they cannot afford not to ride. Next slide, please. So in contrast, although MTA is not operating their express commuter routes, the RTA has been operating limited service on the regional commuter routes during the pandemic. And as you can see on this chart, the average ridership decline on those regional routes, it's about 90%. Many of those are riders that probably have other options or are working from home. And again, this is one of the markets that it's going to be more difficult to predict when they're going to come back. Next slide, please. As we consider all these circumstances, and I mentioned some of them, including the federal regulations, the ridership declines, the pandemic, the budget uncertainty, we need to start thinking about which direction we're going to move with some of these temporary changes and the permanency of them. And the spring service changes is the ideal time to start doing that. So we devise some guiding principles in order to make sure that these potential changes are addressed in the best way possible. And I'll highlight here at the very top, anything we do, we have to make sure that any potential changes are are looked and analyzed thoroughly, considering the social equity or under a social equity lens. So as I mentioned previously, we have a lot of people that are working low-wage jobs, the hourly service workers, critical jobs. They don't really have an option to stay home. There's a lot of people out there struggling, they're hurting. So I think we have a responsibility to make sure that we are providing the best service possible that we can to provide option and access for those people to opportunities. And along with all that, we have to be responsible balancing our needs and resources. By doing that, we have to make sure that we are addressing improvements to the service, following along things like better buzz, but at the same time being flexible, because these trends are changing. If anything we've learned from 2020 is that those trends are changing quickly. Sometimes we have to adapt quickly. So it's important that we still remain flexible. Next slide, please. Most of the routes are still operating at lower frequencies than pre-COVID. So we are seeing changes in certain routes and certain times. There's things like overcrowding in some of the major routes, and we have to make sure that we allocate the right resources to be able, from a safety standpoint, provide for better social distancing, but also to provide better service with more frequency. So Route 23, Dickerson, this is a good example. This is a high productivity route on a busy corridor. There's a lot of hourly employees that work on this corridor. This is one that can benefit from more frequent service along the main corridor, along with the realignment of the loop around the Chesapeake and Parkwood neighborhoods in the northwest part of the route, can provide for more effective connections and more dependable and effective service and safer service along the main corridor. Next slide, please. Route 34 Upper Mills, this is currently a large loop that alternates directions. If you've never taken this route and you pick up the schedule, I'll probably guarantee that you'll look confused. If you've taken this route, your main complaint will be probably that it takes too long. So in the end, this route is it's very infrequent and it's difficult and confusing to use. The main destination on this route is Upper Mills, so the majority of the trips on this route end or originate at Upper Mills. And again, a lot of service workers that ride this route. So by simplifying this route, we will provide faster, more direct service to Upper Mills, which is the main destination. This will also allow for providing service enhancements for Route 6, Lebanon, by adding Sunday service to help mitigate some of the impacts and ensure continued access for passengers on the Lebanon route on this corridor. Next slide, please. So another example on the frequency needs is Route 7, Hillsboro, similar to the Dickerson example that I mentioned earlier. There is overcrowding on this route. Well, more specifically, that is happening in the segment between downtown and Vanderbilt, and not so much south of Vanderbilt. And again, we know that this is related to service workers going to the Vanderbilt Medical Center. So we've had success with some of the short-term changes that we've done, implementing a concept called short-term, which the basic concept is adding additional trips for a specific segment of the route where we're seeing more demand on that corridor. It helps save some money because you're not adding service all throughout the route, but only when it's needed the most. And this is something that we would like to do also in this corridor and any other corridors that we're seeing some of that problem. Next slide, please. So I talked about some examples where we can make improvements on routes that need resources. So I'll just now touch on some approaches that may enable us to accomplish that. These are limited service routes, and one of the characteristics of these is that they don't operate all day long, as the name suggests. The ridership decline on these services has been substantial, and it prompted some of these routes also provide additional or parallel service. In the case of the 24 Bellevue, there's Route 5 West End that runs parallel. Or in the case of the 35 Rivergate Express, there is service on Gallatin Pike for Route 56. But without a clear indication when these riders are coming back or to what level, we would like to delay the return of these services. This will help us reallocate resources and deploy them in the busiest parts of the network. And of course, we will continue to monitor and see those trends when those shifts may turn and be able to approach or adjust our approach accordingly. Next slide, please. The connector and cross-downs are routes that help connect with the core network and expand access outside of the downtown area. They are important for the longer-term network. However, they are currently one of the lowest performers in the system. More specifically, routes 21, Wedgwood, 25, Midtown, and 72, Grassmere, Edmondson. These are routes where we would like to further reduce the span during midday and late service or later evening service, and also potentially look at eliminating or canceling some weekend service to be able to match the medium-term demand. On the opposite side, we have other connector routes like Route 76, Madison, and 77, Thompson, that can use additional resources on those routes. Next slide, please. Route 73, this is a route that is currently suspended. We did some restructuring of this route back over a year ago, and we turned a portion of that route into a connector route, replacing the former Route 33. However, the ridership on this route hasn't really improved. Even before COVID, this was a very low performer, and it's the only one of the connector routes that we had to suspend early in the pandemic. We would like to recommend potential cancellation of this route. Next slide, please. So I went through what we're seeing, what those longer trends are, and how this will help us start preparing for changes in the spring. In terms of the next steps, again, I'm sorry, my light is just going out of me. Okay, it's back. So in terms of the next steps, we have to be able to adapt quickly and react. But the next step will be to put a proposal together to go to the public to get their feedback and reactions to these potential changes. We'll do that or release that in the next few weeks. We'll have to complete an equity analysis on the proposed changes. We'll complete that at the beginning of 2021. We have to make sure that we identify any potential disparate impacts or disproportionate burdens on potentially impacted populations. We have to assess the comments from the public and see what the main reaction is, and see what areas are more inflicting more pain, or what could be better improvements to based on that feedback. And based on that, we'll bring a final recommendation to the board in February at your February meeting, and then changes will go into implementation in the beginning of April, on April 5th. Next slide. Oh, so that's the end of my slides, and I will turn it over to you, Madam Chair, to lead the discussion part.
Great, thank you, Felix. You're so good at what you do, you know that. You really are. Comments?
That's good of my team.
Let's hear from the board, and comments can be around the details of the spring adjustment, the prior presentation, wherever you want to take it. So who wants to make a comment?
I'd like to ask a question, and it may be an uninformed one, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it, and it can be for either Steve or Felix. So I knew as a bus rider that we only, pretty much changed in spring and fall, because everybody always rallied. They wanted to keep their driver, that they had, and I think that's wonderful that we all felt that way. But why don't And then I saw, Felix, thank you for your presentation. That was fantastic. That it takes 4 months basically for a proposal, to come all the way through fruition. But for me, it begs the question a little bit why we don't evaluate routes quarterly instead of every 6 months. And before I turn it over, I want to say I am just really impressed, amazed at what this group does, with the budget it has. As somebody who's been in government a long time, absolutely just amazing. If I don't have a lot of comments on this, that, the other, you all have taken a very lean piece of meat, as to use the bone example, and have made something quite wonderful. And I applaud that. So as I say, this is not a critical comment as much as in this new world moving forward, the term of the day is pivot, and how we can pivot more quickly to move things where they need to be. And, the quarterly question being that first question on that. Thank you.
Maybe, Madam Chair, I'm happy to, this is Steve, I'm happy to take a crack at that. Mary, one of the reasons we don't do the full service changes too frequently is it's a relatively expensive process there's time involved in the driver pick when you have to have 400 people picking new work. Obviously, depending on the nature of the changes, there are costs associated with schedule printing, that type of thing. The other thing we always want to be cautious of is, transit riders are a notorious creature of habit. So we get massive complaints even when we adjust a time point by 2 minutes. So the twice a year changes. Now, the honest truth is, and certainly it's been accelerated and magnified during the pandemic, is we're kind of making on the fly adjustments, based on schools coming in and out of session. We'll add tripper buses when schools are in and out of session. But in terms of the major changes that we do, we want to do a relatively limited number because of, frankly, the intense analysis required that Felix talked about, the public process, driver pick process, and expense. And that's why, frankly, when you look at the Better Bus material, there are significant increases in service and enhancements on our fixed bus system, but there's also a much greater reliance to a more on-demand type of a model, particularly in some of the areas that aren't as dense. In the outlying areas like Antioch or Bellevue, for instance. Does that address it at all?
It does, and that makes absolute sense why an on-demand model that you have, this sort of more standard routes. And I wholly concur that bus riders are very much people of habit. We even sat in the same seats. People would make people move if they were in my seat. Maybe that's just me, but yeah, it's very Sheldon-like if you're a Big Bang Theory person. So I appreciate this. Thank you.
Hannah, are you there? Would you like to make a comment or question?
I think she said she got kicked out, but she's trying to get back on.
All right, and is Walter with us today?
He is not.
Okay, how about you, Gail? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I'm last. It's we do a lot with less, Mary, but we can't always do a lot with less. And we have to make certain that we are fully funded so our public can have the transportation needs met. And I'm really excited, like Janet said, about the mayor's transportation plan, because for me, that also says that this is important to our city. This is important to our city's leadership. And with the council supporting it, Tuesday night, it solidified the importance of transit. So the things that Felix talks about, the thing that becomes so critically important, and when we talk about this budget, the word equity keeps flowing through this, and about how much. And with everything that has happened with COVID in our city, it is so critical that we continue to keep the public first, we keep our ridership first, and we keep equity at the very forefront of the lens of what we do. But we can only do that if we're fully funded. If we're funded enough to meet the needs of the citizens, of Nashville, and that it's consistent. And it's not always we are in the corner begging for $5 more, or saying, you know, Felix, can you work 2 more hours, even though you've already done 28 today. So it's we just can't keep finding that way. So I'm really excited about what we have here, and I'm always excited about the future of MTA because we have such committed professionals, our drivers. Everybody, you know, and I say it every month since COVID, and I think I may have even said it before, that just how committed everybody here, but we can only be as committed as the city is to our budget. And so that becomes critically important. But I'm excited about the work that's gone into this. I'm excited that we're going to be able to provide equitable ridership for our riders. And I think we're on the right track. So Felix, thanks for that report. And I just see so many different ways to help so many people that have had to depend on us and that have had to depend on this city to be essential and be heroes for all of us here in this city. And the MTA has been a hero as well. So I like where we are, but I do agree that we have to be funded. And I appreciate our grace this year that we have provided the city as well.
Right. That's so funny you said that, Gail, because that was kind of my closing comment, which is, as far as the spring shifts, the staff has such amazing mastery of what is the right thing in the short term that I'm just like, go do your job. I just think our messaging is going to be really important this year before the mayor and the council, because it's so easy to fall into this trap of thinking, well, ridership's down, so we can just cut from MTA. And I promise you, this is a short-term situation we're in. I mean, y'all know I'm in the real estate space. Workers are coming back. Now, maybe they may work from home 1 or 2 days a week, but demand will be back.
Absolutely.
For people to think, oh, we can just keep cutting service because nobody's riding, that's fine for a few months, but it is not appropriate for 18 years. So, 18 months. So anyway, thank you all for your comments.
Before you move on, Janet, I think Steve's hand is up to say something. Steve, did I see your hand up?
Hi, Steve.
Yes. Thank you. So I just wanted to kind of bring a little bit of closure to the 2 items. When Ed and I talked about the scenarios, you know, Metro's able to come here, or here. The intent with what Felix is talking about, because of where we are in the cycle and the lead time for service changes, is to move forward with proposals and public hearings and Title VI analysis on this restructuring becoming more permanent. And that'll be controversial. I mean, obviously people want more service on the 23, they want better service on the 34. But they also don't necessarily want the 24, the 35, or the 73 to go away. So the goal would be that we put ourselves in a position, as we know more through the process, whether it's Metro's budget process, the status of federal assistance, where we're headed with the pandemic, of being able to give the board the best possible information at the right time. So even though we would be going out with that, we wouldn't be making a final decision on it until your February meeting. And if Metro is able to honor our full requirement, then frankly, we would be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. You know, we would be able to make the enhancements we know that we need to make and still be able to sustain some of those routes, even if they continue to be temporarily suspended because of the pandemic, Janet, as you allude to. For instance, the commuter routes, we don't want to dump commuter routes. But, you know, as the RTA ridership starts to come back, then we can assess, is it time to bring back those express routes? So it's really just being able to give ourselves more options as we find out more things through the course of the next 4 or 5 months.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
And
thank you, everybody.
Hannah came back on, so I didn't know if she had any comments.
Hi, Hannah. You got any comment or anything to add here, friend?
Oh, hey, thanks. No, I just agreed with you, Janet, that this thing is so unpredictable. We can't be making long-term decisions, and I think as much as we can kick the can down the road on any kind of cut decisions, we ought to, because we don't know what's going to happen in June. We hope it's good.
Agreed. Agreed. Excellent point. Thank you, Hannah. Okay, with that, that'll close out our discussion. And we've got one other discussion item, which is, or more of a presentation, is Miriam Leibovitz is here to talk to us about our Drive to End Chronic Homelessness program overview. So, Miriam, I will hand it off to you and let you introduce our guests.
Thank you, Madam Committee Chair and members of the board. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our Metro partners from the Homeless Impact Division. Today, you'll hear from Rachel Cook, the HMIS Administrator with the Homeless Impact Division, and Judy Tackett, who's the Director of the Homeless Impact Division, and Assistant Director Abigail Dowell are also available and here to answer questions after the presentation. As mentioned in your packets on page 14, we embarked on a partnership with the Homeless Impact Division in 2017 as part of a Metro public improvement project to work towards the elimination of one of the barriers to permanent housing and higher income by providing chronically homeless individuals bus passes and caseworker support. Under this program, the Nashville MTA provides the Homeless Impact Division up to 500 local bus passes to distribute to individuals age 18 or over who are experiencing chronic homelessness during the fiscal year. The program is now entering its fourth program year, and with that, Rachel will provide you with additional program details and updates.
All right, thank you, Miriam. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Rachel Cook. I'm the HMIS Administrator over at the Homeless Impact Division of Metro Social Services. Thanks again for having us today. I have a couple of slides to share with you all, just some program updates here. So next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. All right, so just an overview of what this program entails. So the key program activities of our Drive to End Homelessness or Connector Card program are the four components of housing navigation, bus pass utilization, service connection, and ongoing support for clients, which ultimately our goal is permanent housing for those folks. Next slide, please. So as Miriam mentioned, the eligibility for the requirements look like people who are at least 18 years old, who are literally homeless as defined by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which looks like people who live on the streets or a place not meant for habitation or emergency shelters, places like that. Also, people who have experienced 5 or more months of continuous homelessness and have a disabling condition. In addition to that, clients must be willing to work with a housing navigator toward housing, and that looks like a case manager or a social worker at one of our many partner agencies in the city. That housing navigator submits an application to our department here at the Metro Homeless Impact Division, and additionally, that housing navigator must enter data into the coordinated entry process of our Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, to give updates about that client's goals that they're working toward, how they're utilizing that bus pass, things like that. Next slide, please. All right, so to talk a little bit more about what that looks like for our clients to work with a housing navigator as a part of this program, the individual must be willing to work with that navigator to engage in housing search, to utilize that bus pass, to work on that housing search, to visit service providers, access supportive services, and to have regular follow-ups with that navigator. And these navigators, as I mentioned, enter their case notes into our HMIS system every 2 weeks at least until that client is housed. So the social worker housing navigator is very engaged with the client along the way as they utilize this bus pass and continue to document things like when they've contacted a client, any changes in their housing situation or their income benefit situation, what they're doing specifically to work toward permanent housing, and how the client's utilizing the bus pass. Next slide, please. All right, so this program, like Miriam said, we just entered our 4th program year this summer. So since October 2017, these numbers By the end of program year 3, 912 individuals had received bus passes through the Connector Card program, and 469 of those individuals had been permanently housed with the use of their bus pass. Next slide, please. All right, so this breaks down our number of bus passes received by month. So program year 1, which started in October, so it's a little bit shorter than the other program years, October 1st, 2017 to June 30th, 2018, 344 individuals received bus passes. In the second year, 296 more individuals received bus passes. And in the third program year, 272 individuals have received bus passes. As of November 30th, so for this first part of program year 4 that we're currently in, so July 1st, 2020 through November 30th, an additional 68 people have received bus passes. The next slide, please. All right, so here, this looks at people who have been permanently housed as a result of being a part of this program based on the month that their card was distributed. So again, this information is true as of June 30th of this year. Of the folks who received a connector card in program year 1, 160 of those individuals have been permanently housed. In program year 2, 169 of those individuals have been permanently housed, and from program year 3, 89 of those individuals. So it's easy to kind of talk through those numbers quickly, but that really is amazing to see all of these people who have moved into permanent housing. Let's see. 8 more have been housed since this program year began that we're currently in now, and a total of 497 individuals have been housed in the history of this program, which is absolutely incredible. Next slide, please. So a little bit of demographic information, who is being served by this program. Most participants are between 45 and 64 years old, about 57%. And all participants, as I mentioned, have reported a disabling condition to be eligible for the program, and the majority of those participants primarily reported a mental or physical disabling condition. Next slide, please. 10% of all card recipients have been veterans. 76% of participants have been homeless for over 12 months in the past 3 years, and 41% of participants have been homeless for 24 plus months in the past 3 years. So we're really getting at that chronic homeless population who can really benefit, who are some of the most vulnerable people who we work with. Next slide, please. On average, participants were housed within 143 days of receiving a bus pass. The majority of participants were housed within 6 months, that's 73%, and 42 participants were housed within 3 months. So this is a 1-year program, and there are a number of participants who continue to utilize their bus pass once they have already been housed, and then the bus pass lasts for up to 1 year. Next slide, please. So we continue to measure these outcomes on a monthly basis and report out on those who have been enrolled in the program and their outcomes, what type of living situation they are moving to, and how their housing navigation efforts are going. And this collaborative effort between WeGo and MHED, among other community providers, I think it's about 15 or 16 at least community providers who have applied for their clients to have this connector card. It makes a difference in our clients' lives every day. Next slide, please. All right, so this is our most recent update. This is the type of report that we put out each month. So this one goes through November, just broken down by bus passes issued per month and people housed for issuance month. And I think that is the last one. We have time for questions today, so I'd be glad to answer Any questions about the connector card program itself? We also have Judy Tackett, our director, who can answer any additional questions that you all have for us.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel. And to me, I love this program because it's not just a bus pass, because we know it's just so complex, all of the issues. So putting those wraparound services, I think, is so important. Other questions or comments for our speakers?
Great job. Great work you're doing.
Yeah. Agreed.
Especially in these times.
Especially in these times. That's exactly right, Gail. Any other board comments or questions? Well, we just applaud your work. We thank you for it, and just keep doing it, because there's never been a greater need than right now. So we're so appreciative, and thank you for that really data-packed report as well. So great. Well, I believe that concludes the New Initiatives Committee, Madam Chair. So I'll hand it back to you, Gail.
Well, Madam Chair, you had a lot of items today, and some really critical, important items for the work that is being done here at MTA. So thank you for your leadership.
Of course.
I'm going to go a little bit out of order going forward. Walter is not here with us today, so I'm going to sort of do his report. I think Margaret's on the line. Margaret, can I do any of these together? Any of these action items? And Ed and Dan, I'm going to put you at the bottom after, if we have time left after, but I think both of your reports are clear enough that if people have questions, they can reach out to you. So it's not as necessary to go over them. I don't know if Margaret's on to answer that.
Madam Chair, she is on the line. She can hear us. We've been trying to help her. She can hear us, but we cannot hear her.
Okay.
If IT, if you would promote, she's actually logged on in two different on a phone and a computer. IT, if you would promote her from the attendee to participant, and then she'll be able to respond.
Okay, well, we're going to get started anyhow. She'll give me some advice as she comes on. But so first,
Gail.
Yes,
Gail, you can do whatever you want.
Oh, I can do whatever I want. What?
Okay, mute Margaret. We shouldn't have said that, right?
So Ed, if I could just have you just like really quickly, I think we've all read the armored car contract extension. If you could just give us like a 1 minute kind of piece on it, it'd be great.
I can do it in less than that.
Okay.
We currently have a contract with Loomis. That contract is about to expire on December the 31st. We did go out for RFP proposals in August and received 2 proposals. There is a very big disparity between the quotes, and we have been working with both companies or bids to understand the differences. And I don't know if it's a COVID problem, but the availability of people to answer questions was very difficult. Procurement did a great job of trying to get answers, but unfortunately we have not gotten them to our satisfaction. So we are asking for a 1-year extension to the Loomis contract for picking up our cash and our fare boxes. It's a very good internal control. We do not touch the cash that comes on the bus. It goes from the fare box to the vault, straight to the armored car carrier, and then into our bank. So because of that, we want to make a good decision, and we'll continue that. But at this point, we're asking for a 1-year contract extension with Loomis for an amount not to exceed $132,200. And I will remind the board that this does have a contract termination clause for both parties. So if we do make a change, we can make that change.
Perfect. And that is the staff recommendation. So since that is a staff recommendation and not a committee recommendation, can I please have a motion?
So moved. Janet Miller.
So Janet Miller moves the recommendation of the staff for the 1-year contract extension with Loomis Armed Services. And may I have a second, please?
Mary Griffin, second.
So there is a motion and second. Is there any further discussion? There being no further discussion, I will call for the vote. All those, if you're in favor, please say aye. Janet Miller?
Janet Miller, aye.
Mary Griffin?
Mary Griffin, aye.
Gail Carr-Williams, aye. I think Hannah fell off the line. Hannah, are you still on the line? She is not. And Walter is still not on the line. Is that correct? But we do have 3, so the motion carries. Thank you both very much. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
The shelter vendor contract. Denise, if we could go through this rather quickly too, because I think we've all had a chance to review it and read it. So,
okay, I'll give you just a couple bullet points. We went into a contract with Decamil Manufacturing in 2014. In 2014, we are nearing the end of that contract. So we are on the search for a new supplier. This past August, we sent out a solicitation to 21 possible suppliers, including several DBE fabricators. After follow-up outreach with the DBE fabricators, we received interest from one firm. However, the firm didn't feel they were qualified to respond to our RFP. They have very limited experience with standardized shelter manufacturing. For future opportunities, the staff will review with them to feature their skill set for custom shelters and signage. Given that limited DBE shelter manufacturers and limited subcontracting opportunities, the DBE goal of 0% was assigned to this solicitation. Ultimately, we received proposals from Toller Manufacturing, Future Systems, and Decamil. In all honesty, to make it short, Toller Manufacturing stood above the rest with their product suite, their qualifications, their product warranty, and customer support. Over the course of this contract, we look to replace approximately 30 shelters per year that are beyond useful life, while also expanding the number of sheltered stops. Based upon the result of the solicitation, we are requesting the board to authorize the Chief Executive Officer to enter into a goods and service contract with Toller Manufacturing for a total contract amount not to exceed $1.5 million for the initial 3-year term and a not to exceed amount of $300,000 for each option year. Funding for the purchases under this contract will be allocated annually in the Nashville MTA capital budget. I hope I made that quick enough, and thank you.
oh no, you did, and I think this was your first time at the table, was it not, Denise, to present for a?
And it was, and I'm so sorry. I thought I hit the video and I didn't, Gail. But yes,
that's all right. Well, welcome to the table, and I just wanted to make certain I let you have this moment because that's really important, and you do really good work, and you always have. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's it's my staff that does the work. I give them all the kudos, but thank you.
Well, good presentation. And Mary doesn't know what I mean by the table, but usually at our board meetings, we're at a big table. And so just as a point of reference. So there's a recommendation from the staff, and I think I will need a motion for approval. And I will ask you just one question. I assume on the DBE issue that you were confronted with, that you got good guidance from Amber Gooding regarding this. And Rita, is that correct?
Oh, gosh, yes. Actually, I had a lengthy conversation with Amber day before yesterday. Given the fact that a lot of our projects will be able to encompass DBE suppliers, hopefully, I'm trying to educate myself as much as I can on, the criteria and what we have to do. So, yes, Amber has been a godsend as far as helping me through this.
Well, she'll be a great educator for all of us. So great job. Thank you. So if I can have a motion for the recommendation of staff.
Mary Griffin, I'm going to try on this one. I move to recommend that we approve the Toller contract and the funding as specified by Ms. Denise Nicolosi. That's my motion.
Thank you.
Janet Miller, second.
So is there any further discussion? With no further discussion, I will call for the vote. Mary Griffin, your vote?
Mary Griffin, aye.
Janet Miller?
Janet Miller, aye.
And Gail Carr-Williams, aye. So the motion, and Hannah, again, has still been knocked off, so she's not on. And Walter's not on. So The motion passes, and we have a new contract with COA. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, the next two, I think we probably can do these two together. Bill or Carl, or you all can do it together. Bring both of these, and then we could just vote on both of them collectively, if that's okay.
Sure, Madam Chair. Carl is out today, unfortunately, getting a root canal, so he's going to present the bulk.
So people do anything not to be at our board meeting.
So, no, I'm not sure of that. But yeah, so in the essence of time, and I know we're tight here, so I will I'll go through these and I'll point out a few things on both of these actually. The first one being the bulk fluids action item, and bulk fluids and lubricants are the bulk fluids are the antifreeze, windshield washer fluid, DEF, that kind of thing. The lubricants are engine oil, gear oil, transmission fluid. These were advertised in October by the procurement department, written or advertised upon our spec, which in the specifications, obviously we have to make sure that these lubricants, particularly the lubricants, meet all the manufacturer's requirements so that we meet the warranty requirements for all the components on the bus. The invitation to bid was sent out to 10 vendors, along with being posted on the Nashville MTA government website. The procurement department received bids from Kimbrough Oil, Harman Energy, and Key Oil Company, all meeting the deadline to submit those bids. The procurement department, along with the maintenance department, reviewed those bids, and it was determined that Harman Energy was the lowest responsive bidder. So the staff requested the board authorize the CEO to enter into a product and services contract with Harman Energy for initial, and this, oh, by the way, this bid was for a 3-year term with 2 one-year options. So with that, the not to exceed amount would be $1,685,000. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on that.
Janet, any questions about this one? Okay. If no questions, I'll let him present the other one, and then we'll put both of them together to vote on, if that's okay.
Okay.
So the new flyer bus purchases.
Yes, the new flyer bus purchase. This is for 5 60-foot articulated buses, and this contract would be with New Flyer of America, which, by the way, and I think you heard Darius mention that we run right now 60-foot buses that are made by Navi and New Flyer. So we've had these buses in before. This purchase would be under the Commonwealth of Virginia's contract with New Flyer of America. And this is a bit unique. We don't have our own spec out on the street right now, which we are currently writing a spec for 60-foot buses, and that will be out probably March or April of 2021 for the next purchase of 60-foot buses in 2022. But right now, we needed bus replacements, so we went out and we searched other states that may have a contract, and Virginia did have one. So this will be under their contract with New Flyer, which, by the way, passes all the federal guidelines, FTA guidelines, along with it inside the FAST Act, which is known as the FAST Act, where there's no real geographical restrictions on what state can use those. These 5 buses are a part of our capital plan to get our average age of fleet down to 6 years of age. These are, again, 60-foot buses, so it certainly helps with our social distancing on the buses. They will come in with the driver's barrier, permanent barrier, which gives our driver a little bit more protection. And again, we've had experience with New Flyer. So the staff has requested that the board authorize the CEO to enter into a contract with New Flyer of America for these 5 buses. The buses themselves are priced at $784,053.30. So the total amount of that contract would be $3,920,266.49. In that contract would be the tools and the training for these vehicles. They're all included in that price. The funding source would be utilizing the 2018 federal 5339B discretionary award, and that's matched by TDOT and the approved local metro capital funds. So, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on that.
Mary and Janet, are there any questions? If there are no questions, if there could be a motion to approve the recommendation as written in the board action item for both the bulk fluids contract award and the New Flyer bus purchase, that would be great.
I'll make
Mary.
Go, yeah, Mary. Yeah.
Approve the contract with Carbon Energy for both bulk fluids and lubricants as described by Griffin. I also New Flyer of America for the CEO to purchase 5 articulated buses that includes the tools and training as also described by Mr. Bill Miller.
Well done, thank you. If I can have a second?
I will second that excellent motion.
So I have a motion by Mary Griffin and a second by Janet Miller. Is there any further conversation, any further discussion? With there being none, I will now call for the vote. Mary Griffin, what is your vote?
Mary Griffin, aye.
Janet Miller, what is your vote?
Janet Miller, aye.
Williams, aye. Are there any other board members wishing to vote at this time? With hearing none, the motion does carry for both the bulk fluids contract award and the New Flyer bus purchase. This is exciting news, right? We are progressing. This is wonderful. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And so if you all don't have any questions of Ed or Dan regarding anything, we can just sort of move to the next item on our agenda. Okay. Next is the CEO report. Steve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, in the interest of time, I'm going to abbreviate the report. We've talked so much about the pandemic today, and it all comes down to a personal level. And like everyone else, we're extremely concerned with the recent surge. We currently have about 39 employees off on COVID leave. Some of those are folks who've tested positive. Some are ill, some are asymptomatic, and also folks awaiting tests. And this level is triple what we saw about a month ago. So obviously it's very concerning. Nick Oldham, our safety director, has been in constant touch with Dr. Wright at the Public Health Department. Fortunately, our critical employees are in a high priority, not the highest, but they're considered critical infrastructure employees. So we're hoping to get those frontline folks immunized as quickly as possible as we get into 2021. I want to give a shout out to State Representative Harold Love. Harold invited us to participate with him in a commemoration of the anniversary of Rosa Parks' ride. So he and I got to actually ride service and talk to folks. We boarded at the site of the brand new, soon-to-be North Nashville Transit Center. We rode in on the Bordeaux bus, rode out on the 42 St. Cecilia Cumberland, and he was able to committed to each other to work harder to make it much bigger and much better and much more expanded in 2021. Projects continue to develop and improve. If you ride the Nolensville corridor, you continue to see progress on the Nolensville shelter project. Finally, I'm express appreciation to Bill Miller on certainly the items that he presented to you today. As we all know, he came in at a time that certainly needed transition in our operations department, and he is planning to retire to the snow country of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, toward the first part of next year, and we are interviewing several candidates to not replace Bill, but at least to carry us on to the next level. And again, I would be remiss if I did not close my comments with, as board members have, with acknowledging the great work that was done on the mayor's transportation plan that was adopted by council this past Tuesday. You all have had the opportunity to meet Faye DeMassimo, the mayor's senior advisor for transportation and infrastructure, who absolutely did yeoman's work in shepherding that process, both through the departments, WeGo, TDOT, the federal agencies, as well as a 40-member council, achieving a 33 yay, 5 nay, and 1 abstention result. So as I texted Faye immediately after the vote, now that the easy part's done, we can kick into gear and get to the tough stuff. So unless there are any questions, Madam Chair, that concludes my report.
No, I don't have any questions. Mary, any questions? Anybody else, any questions? Steve, you're doing a wonderful job, and deeply appreciate your commitment to MTA and everybody that's there. So thank you for your leadership. I don't think we would have made it to this point without your great leadership. So thank you. It's unwavering. So that leads me to my report, which is going to be very brief. I want to reiterate the the points of the conversation about how important this budget is and how important it is for us to be fully funded to the extent that we can run the service as we have and whatever is needed to make certain that we're where we should be. And that smaller, higher percentage, but yet and still is very critical for us to be able to have that kind of funding. And to that point, I really would like to hopefully put together some letter or note to the mayor encouraging that our budget be fully funded with all of the board members, but I'll work on that over the holiday break and possibly present it to you all when we come back in January. So, but that's really important. And I too want to congratulate Faye for her great work on the mayor's transit plan. I know how hard she worked. She was in the community, and she too holds that equity banner real high, and she lives by it and works by it, and I really appreciate her hard work. And I'm excited for our continued work with the mayor's office on this transportation plan. And again, for all of our MTA WeGo staff that worked on it, thank you all for all of your efforts. So that's sort of where I am, but I just want to say it's the holiday season, and it's a time for all of us to recharge and sort of rethink about things and to sort of come in with our family safely. It's not going to look like it normally looks, but it's still going to look the way it should look, which is with love and comfort of one another, whether or not it's online or if it's in person, and sort of make certain that you look out for one another, take care, and be extremely safe. And do as best you can to enjoy the holidays, the 2020 holidays, because they're a little bit different. But again, I say it every day how appreciative I am of the work that you all do, and you all have been essential to Nashville and to so many people. And I am so this year that I've been able to be a small part of this. So wishing you all good health and happiness as we go forward. Anybody else? Let's see.
Mic drop. Did we all freeze?
Oh, did the mic drop?
I don't know.
So did y'all hear anything I said?
Yes, we did.
Yes, that was
you.
Good comment.
So I was like, wait a minute. Was I?
Oh, you were on mute. No.
How about myself mute?
No, he's messing with you.
Stop that, Ed. You know, I do miss us being in the space where we can mess with each other, right? We had no about arguments this year, right?
We heard every word, and that was very well received.
So you all are fabulous and wonderful, and so it's going to be good. Mary, welcome. It's so good to have you here with us, and grateful that the mayor chose such an excellent board member to
Well,
join us.
Not because you said that, Gail, but I was just about to say, I would love to assist you with a letter, to review, work on with you over the holidays. I was thinking about the fact that I just consider transportation as part of infrastructure. And so if you want to be the IT city, you need infrastructure and transportation. That is the IT city, right? So for me, full funding is just not even a question, right?
Another piece that makes us a IT city is compassion and care, and I think MTA has shown that exceptionally this year. Anything else for the good of the order? Steve, anything else, my dear?
Just wish you all a happy and safe.
Take all we learned from this year and be better.
No tornadoes, no pandemics.
Right. No, nothing. All right. If that's the case, then we are adjourned. Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays. Thanks, Gail.
Happy holidays.